Hi, I'm David Scranton, and thanks for clicking this video. Today, we're talking about inflation and all the ways that you can help protect your retirement plan against it. And I'm here with Jeff Small, President of Arbor Financial Services, as well as our guest, Greg McBride, Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Analyst at Bankrate.com. Greg, thanks so much for joining us today on The Income Generation.
Great to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Greg, Jeff Small here. It's great to see you again. So, we've been in this inflationary environment. It doesn't seem to be no end in sight. Is it going to level off soon, or will it be an ongoing problem during the recovery?
Well, I don't think inflation is nearly as transitory as the Federal Reserve seems to think it is. I think when inflation will level off, but I think it's going to level off at a point higher than what we've become accustomed to. In the decade preceding the pandemic, inflation was in the 1.5% to 2% neighborhood. I expect that when the dust settles, we're probably looking at inflation in the 2.5% to 3% neighborhood for a while. Those supply chain constraints, I think, have persisted a lot longer than was initially expected.
And when do you think that dust will settle, Greg? Will it be the end of 2022? Might it be the end of 2023? What's your best guess?
I think we will see some of that dust settling throughout 2022. We're already seeing some of these more temporary items, prices that had spiked earlier this year, pulling back. And I think what we're likely to see going forward maybe is just broader number of categories seeing sustained price increases. So I think that unfolds over the course of, say, the next 12 months or so. But I think by the time we get to the end of 2022, that's where we start to see those inflation numbers still in that 2.5% to 3% neighborhood.
Okay. Now, it's interesting because, we have a lot of people recently who seem to have come out. For example, Kathy Wood from ARK Investments, who said really, ultimately, she's more worried about deflation than inflation. And that's something that I've been really concerned about since the financial crisis in 2008. So do you see that as being a significant possibility maybe a few years after this leveling out? Or do you think maybe we just stay at that 2% to 3% range, maybe as long as a decade?
I'm more of the opinion that we will go back to this ultra low rate, low inflation, flirting with deflation environment that encompassed much of the developed world in the years since the financial crisis. So, I think that 2.5% to 3% inflation, it'll stick around for, a year or two, maybe even three. But beyond that, that's where I think the things like demographics, the aging population, not just in the US, but in much of the developed world, I think that environment takes hold and, we're back to this ultra low rate environment and low inflation environment that preceded the pandemic.
So it's interesting. We had great economic growth coming with the inflation early on. Now it seems like the big inflation spike we've seen has actually surpassed the growth. But when we get to this 2.5% period, do you think that we're going to be rewarded for that 2.5% inflation for that 2-3 year period with extra economic growth, or is it going to be more of a stagflation type thing?
I'm not as worried about stagflation. I mean, we're because of the demographics, I think when that dust settles, we're still a slow growth economy. I mean, I think you see the economy, growing at a 2.5% rate, but that's after inflation. So, with that 2.5% to 3% inflation on a nominal basis, that means the economy's growing at 5.5%. 6%, something in that neighborhood. So, I do think, we will still see sustainable economic growth, but I think at a more moderate pace, certainly not the bounce back pace that we've seen coming out of the pandemic.
And it sounds like ultimately then when you get out closer to maybe 2025, that's where you see those deflationary headwinds really kicking in, and maybe our economic growth going back to something that's akin to nil, right?
Yeah, that's about the time frame. I do think that the economic growth is likely to be sustained, just at more of a sluggish pace, a slower rate, and that's that environment where we once again confront the idea of deflation, ultra low rates, negative interest rates, those type of things that we've seen in much of the developed world over the last decade plus.
All right, so I guess all the cheap money out there is going to keep the party going for 3 or 4 more years. I certainly hope you're right. Greg McBride, as usual, it's been our pleasure, and thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. And thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this interview, make sure you like it. How? By clicking the thumbs up button. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.